Hi, my name's Anna Serin. I'm Director of Listings Development with the Canadian Securities Exchange. You're joining us here today as part of our Summit on Responsible Investment online series, and I'm lucky to be joined today by one of our CSE issuers, Tyrone Docherty with First Tellurium. First Tellurium built a new approach to mineral exploration. Their model is to generate revenue and investor value through mineral discovery. They have untapped mineral regions and sustainable exploration as part of their approach, as well as mutually beneficial engagement with Indigenous communities. Tyrone, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Anna. Thanks for having me.
This is the third interview I think that we've done so far.
It is.
We're old buddies and used to this discussion. Tyrone, you were part of our Mining Over Canada initiative, which was built during the pandemic, and the only way that we got to connect was online. So it's very nice to sit with you in person now that we've moved beyond that. And as well, you joined us in person last year for our first Summit on Responsible Investment in Kelowna. Yeah. Okay, so first of all, let's jump into it and just let's talk about First Tellurium before we get into our discussion today. What's been going on with you guys?
Well, we've had a big 2023 and 2024 so on. I think it's important to emphasize to people that there's no other company in the world doing what we're doing, which is it's kind of nice. You know, we got critical metal like tellurium, which not too many people understand what its uses are for. But we also have high-grade precious metals on the same deposit up there in Deerhorn in Canada. So with the price of gold and silver doing well, it makes it a more financially interesting situation. And then to top all that, if we weren't lucky enough at that prospect, about a year or two ago, we confirmed that we're sitting on a copper porphyry, which every company is looking for. So the one problem that I have, it's a nice problem to have, but one problem I have is that people look at our market cap and say, how is it possible for a company with a $10 million Canadian market cap to have all these wonderful opportunities available to them? So we say, you know, as I said frequently, don't believe a word I say. You know, go back and check with who our partners are and see what they say about the various opportunities, and you'll figure it out from there.
I think that's a really important note, and that's for a lot of issuers that are out there right now within these markets, is to understand the fundamentals that the company has as opposed to necessarily what the market cap is, as we're dealing with a bit of a depressed and depleted market. But there definitely is some amazing projects and technical advantages to some of the companies out there right now and what they're working on. So definitely make sure that you wear that hat when you're making the decision these days. Right?
Exactly. Well, to put things in perspective, that we did a preliminary economic assessment on our Deerhorn property in 2018. We focused on 20% of our known zone just to show we thought we were economically viable. And the engineering company came back and said that we had robust economics, a 1.6-year payback, and a 42% IRR after tax. And we put that out in our news release calling it robust economics, and the local Securities Commission rapped me on the knuckle saying, you can't use the word robust, it's too promotional. I said, well, it's not my word, it came from the engineers. So since then, you think about it, that was based on $1,300 gold and $17 silver. So gold has almost doubled. You know, it gets to 2,600, it's a double. So whatever it is at 2,550 today, world record. So it's looking very, very good indeed, and silver's done well as well. So we sit there and we call ourselves First Tellurium, and I always joke we should probably call ourselves First and Only Tellurium because we are the only company that's looking for a tellurium. But people, you have to explain to them what tellurium is. And you say, okay, well, tellurium's a critical metal listed in both not only Canada, the United States, but Australia, Britain, Japan, you name it. And its main two functions up till now has been in solar panels. And First Solar, the largest U.S. solar company, they use a mixture of cadmium tellurium. And most of the other companies in the solar industry use silica from China, but they use cadmium tellurium. So obviously we're on their radar. And the other main use has been up to now has been thermoelectrics, and we can talk about that later on about the advancements we're making there. So what's important to us is that, I'm sure most of the viewers know it by now, that the U.S. government in particular, but also the Canadian government, has made a focus on finding deposits of critical metals in either in their home countries or in countries that are friendly to them, such as, you know, Canada obviously is friendly with the U.S. and Australia and so on, because they want to get away from having to depend on the minerals from China. So that's put us in people's watch, if you will. So because being the only one, and I say people that, you know, critical metals are very important. Obviously, they wouldn't use the word critical if they weren't. But you know, you've got graphite, which is critical. You've got all these other ones. cobalt, you name it. But there's like 5 dozen of each of those companies, which is great. But we're the only tellurium company. So anyone that wants to understand how important tellurium is going forward, if they think, hey, we should get a piece of that action, then they'll look towards us and find out. And so when I say to people that, the biggest issue I have to deal with is it too good to be true? So it just so happened about 2012, First Solar did a presentation in Cologne, Germany at a minor metals conference, and they talked about 4 potential suppliers of tellurium down the road. And they mentioned one in China, one in Mexico, one in Sweden, and ourselves in Canada. And they said at the conference, we don't trust China, we don't trust Mexico. So that left ourselves and Sweden as the only 2 that they thought were worthwhile. And about a year and a half, 2 years after that conference, the Swedish company sold all of their tellurium. I don't know to whom. I'm guessing First Solar, but I don't know. But I just use that to reflect on people say, well, here's a situation. It's not us saying that we're an important tellurium property. It's First Solar saying it. So, they're about a 15 or $20 billion company in the U.S. They know who we are, which is great. So one of the newest things, if people look at our share price from a couple of years ago, is that it really took off in January of 2022, at the end of January 22. And the reason for that is the University of British Columbia came out with a new lithium-tellurium battery, which I've been told is far superior to a lithium-ion battery. So we had just listed ourselves in Frankfurt, Germany, in the middle of January of 2022, believing that the Europeans are much farther ahead than us North Americans when it comes to green living and so on. And we thought that once the news from UBC came out, that it would get embraced over there. So what happened, we were trading about 15 or 18 cents for about a year because no one understood what tellurium is. So, it's a story. And then the Global News did a feature on the UBC Okanagan campus that has the battery. They put it on their evening, at their their dinner hour for about 3 or 4 minutes talking about this new wonderful discovery. So the very next day we put out the news where we say it's official, and our stock took off to 71 cents and I think closed at 65, but traded on average 2 to 5 million shares a day, most of it coming out of Europe. Because they understand, hey, this is fantastic. It's better than a lithium-ion battery for a number of reasons, by the way, not just for one. And then it stayed there for a month, as I mentioned. I woke up one morning at the end of February there, and I looked at the pre-market, and our stock was plummeting. I thought, what the heck's going on? Like, there's nothing fundamental. And then I realized when I turned on the regular news, that was the morning that Russia had invaded Ukraine. So everyone in Europe started selling their stocks, and I don't blame them. Yeah. But that's the only reason why it came down. So. When I say up to now, the main uses have been solar panels and thermoelectrics, but this is a big potential there because when you look at the 5 advantages that I've been told, number 1, it's 4 to 10 times more powerful. Number 2, it's easier to charge. Number 3, it lasts twice as long as a lithium-ion battery. Number 4, size-wise. It's probably, it looks like a tenth of the size of a lithium-ion battery. So you can imagine what that would do for weights in cars and airplanes or whatever needs it. And the 5th and probably the most important difference is that it cannot catch fire. Lithium-ion batteries can and do catch fire, as you see in the news all the time. So I say to people, could you imagine if there was no other difference in our lithium-tellurium battery than a lithium-ion, except it didn't catch fire? If that was the only difference, I said, I think insurance companies, automobile companies, and battery companies would be interested.
The ripple effect of that from a financial perspective would be huge.
Yeah, and that's why the Europeans ate it up, because we explained it. Because again, it was UBC saying it, not First Tellurium. They have the credibility. And so my understanding last time I spoke with the partner of UBC is that I think they hope to have a small scale production by the end of 2024 just to show what they have. So that's another area that would be interesting getting our tellurium, because tellurium's a small market. I think an average for the last decade is between 600 to 700 tons a year, and 60% of that comes from China. So if the U.S. is trying to wean themselves off of that, they need to get domestic properties going like ours. And then about 2 years ago, the CEO of First Solar did an interview with S&P Global saying that starting in 2024, this year, that their own internal needs are going to be somewhere between 900 to 1,100 tons a year of tellurium. So S&P Global phoned me up and said, well, do you think there's going to be a bit of a supply problem? I said, well, I'm not a mathematician, but my calculator says that's what it is. So it's very exciting. So, that's why we call ourselves First Tellurium, even though I guess we're precious metals with the copper. We're the only one that has a 43101, a PEA that includes tellurium, and it looks very, very good indeed. And as I mentioned, First Solar mentioned this. So we're not alone, but just the opportunities are opening up for us that, again, when people take the time to realize who we are and what we do, it sort of takes them by surprise. And even myself, I look at it, but I've been in this business almost 40 years. I think it's 40 years next month. And I said to say that I know we're sitting on. I think sometimes I may come across as arrogant when I have my interviews because I know we're sitting on them. I don't fall for the sizzle of the financial world saying, "Hey, we'll give you discounted prices, this and that." We don't need to do it. Unfortunately, a lot of juniors do. We don't because we've got these other opportunities available to us, and we can just see it through. Because as I think and I sold my last company. I only run one at a time. I'm not smart enough to run two. Some guys are. So I took my last company, it was called Quinto Mining. I took it over in 1997. It had a market cap of $4 million, and I was lucky enough to sell it 11 years later for 175 million. But we took paper in the company that acquired us instead of cash, and we owned about 20 or 21% of them. They were called Consolidated Thompson Iron Mines, and then they sold 2 years after that for 4.9 billion. So the 20% that our shareholders held was pretty good if they held on to the stock. So we'll see what happens. So
I think, one thing that you bring up about First Tellurium or tellurium as a commodity and its ability for sustainable products is you brought up something interesting about also sustainable relationships. So when we're looking at sustainability and when we're looking at responsible investment, I think one thing that's also important that we don't think about as much is relationships that have sustainability in themselves. So finding countries where tellurium can be explored and mined for, where there is a future relationship without any eco-political issues such as what we might encounter with China. So I think that there's an element to that as well that needs to be considered as people are making those sustainable choices, or for responsible investment. Speaking of which, you have a very important relationship, I think, as part of First Tellurium, and let's touch on that. You have a very strong relationship with the Indigenous communities is it Northern BC?
Central, all over BC, actually.
All over BC, okay. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, my former chairman, Tony Fogarassi, is a lawyer specializing in commodities, if you will, natural resources, but also First Nations. Yeah. So he made the introduction. I went to high school with Tony, he's a bright guy, and talking about the future of mining in Canada, specifically British Columbia, but in Canada generally, is to have better relations with the First Nations, and the more you put into it, chances are the more you get out of it. So that's sort of the tack that we've taken. And one of our subsidiaries, it's not quite a subsidiary because the First Nations own 51% of Chiona Metals. We own 49%. But because of that, we got involved with an NGO out of Washington, D.C., which we can talk about later, on a project called Salmon Gold, where they want to go in and deal with placer miners. It started a year before we did in Alaska, but we did it in Yukon, where you go into placer miners sell their gold at a premium to two U.S. corporations originally. Now it's 3. And then the extra money gets put back into the river or the stream, and they clean it all up and reintroduce salmon and other fish, and no one's allowed to mine it again. So it's a win-win for everyone. And it just so happened that the 3 corporations now in the U.S. that are buying it are a little company called Apple, and we've got Tiffany and Company, and then a jewelry company I just learned of recently called Majuri, I believe is how they're pronounced. And they're actually making salmon gold jewelry itself, actually called salmon gold, and delivered.
I think I've heard of those 3 companies. Maybe.
Yeah, so
maybe.
we'll see.
And I think, we actually dove into this in our first interview, and maybe you could talk about that a little bit, because I think, especially for new investors into the mineral exploration space or in the mining space, is this understanding of what reclamation is. Mm-hmm. And you did dive into it a little bit. Could you maybe talk to us about it, about the importance of how this gold is being received, and it's through the reclamation process. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, actually through the mining process, and then once they finish selling all the gold at a premium, then they go back in and clean it all up. When the placer miner doesn't want to leave an ounce of gold anywhere, so
that's
get it all done and reintroduced. But
cleans it all up.
Yeah, no, it's my understanding the salmon are flourishing and the other fields, so it's a very good situation. We're just trying to show people it's not your land. Yeah, you got the mineral claims, but it's been there for millions of years, and take care of it properly, and it'll come back and benefit you. So because of our relationship, unintended, we get lots of people phoning up saying, "Hey, we like what you're doing with the First Nations. Would you like to maybe entertain getting involved with us when you have the time and the capital to get involved with it?" So certainly we're looking forward to it. And being involved in salmon gold, even though that's not even close to being our main focus, People check and say, okay, how is it possible that, a company like Apple and so on is dealing with a little junior company? So I think it took 3 months for Apple to check us out before they allowed us to get involved. Because let's face it, the history of junior companies on the exchange sometimes used to be run by people that maybe had struggles with the truth at times, if not being a bit hyperbolic. So they wanted to check us out, who we were, and obviously I had a pretty good run before that with Quinto and what we did and all that, and Tony and the rest of the board. So they let us get involved. So I remember we announced it was August of 2019 that we were involved in this project called Salmon Gold. And so, and we mentioned at the time it was the two U.S. corporations, being Apple and Tiffany Company. And of course, a couple of guys phoned up, say, "Is this true? Or are you just making this up?" So I guess I was being a bit sarcastic. It was 2019. I said, "Well, do you own a computer?" And that was sort of the reaction I got. I said, "Well, just go into apple.com and slash in Salmon Gold. Are you there?" "Yeah." I said, "Well, you see in the middle of their brochure, that First Nations gentleman, name's Alan Adzurza, he's our 51% partner overlooking the Yukon River. So it's Apple promoting it, not us." So again, it's a list of who our partners are. And that's why if people do their due diligence, they'll find that, we're very unique. As I mentioned earlier, there's no one else in the world doing what we're doing. And I don't know too many junior companies that have the relationships with these big people, whether it's University of British Columbia, whether it's Apple, whether it's some of these other people. It's very exciting.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I think that's something that we're also starting to see as a really important factor of all mineral exploration and mining companies is building these and fostering these relationships with Indigenous communities. Is this something that you think will continue to see develop in the capital markets and a demand from the investor?
It all depends. I've learned that the investors are very fickle. It's all that they want to do the right thing as long as it benefits them.
As long as it
And I
benefits.
think the advantages, the big companies I believe are starting to go that way. But because we were probably the first of the junior companies to sort of have this push, thanks to Tony, is that we sort of gained a bit of attention from people. So some people are saying, "Hey, we want to be like First Tellurium," but words are cheap.
Yeah.
It's actions that count. So, and that's why we focused on these green minerals, because, everyone understands about gold and silver. But if you can help with, solar panels and energy or EVs and whatever the case is, you're sort of putting your money where your mouth is. And that's why we're very confident we're going to do very, very well. Because I haven't had a chance to talk about our latest.
We're going to talk about that next.
Okay.
So let's get into it.
Sure.
So you have some recent news. There's a recently patented thermoelectric device that First Tellurium is a part of. Tell us all about this.
Yeah, well, we got approached by an inventor from Florida who was an engineer for Toyota. And Toyota lent him out to General Motors for the last couple of years, and he was in charge of building and running their robotic EV plants. Each one's worth about 225 million US, and he was in charge of 3 of them. So as I say to people, if he's smart enough for Toyota and smart enough for General Motors, I think he's smart enough for First Tellurium. So he approached me because he invented a better mousetrap, so to speak. His thermoelectric device is far superior to anything on the market for a few reasons, why we patented them. And the reason.
Sorry, can you tell us what a thermoelectric device is?
Yeah, it's basically it turns energy from heat to cold and cold to heat and all that, in a refrigerator or whatever the case is. So he just found a better one because you don't have it in mass scale like in big factories, because the current models of thermoelectric, they use powdered minerals. And of course, when they get to 150 to 200 degrees centigrade, they start melting, go hot, cold, hot, cold. It might last for 5 years, 10 years, but they can't put it in big time operation. So the reason he called me, and thank goodness for Google, he needs tellurium because his invention requires 75% of his invention is tellurium. So that's why I thank goodness for that. We should call ourselves First and Only Tellurium, but we'll stick with First Tellurium for now. So we did a deal, and he came up in Vancouver to demonstrate to people. And then what we did afterwards is that about a week or two afterwards, we actually put a video online of Michael putting a heat gun and blasting it at our prototype, no ill effects, and that was at 1800 degrees centigrade.
Wow.
Yeah, and the reason he called me originally is that he believed that our this thermoelectric device could replace the alternator in internal combustion engines.
Wow.
And add efficiency. So that's why I say, well, that's exciting because everyone's going down that track. So when I phoned the NGO in Washington that we ended up doing an MOU with, which I'll talk about, they have connections to various governments and all that. And I said, look, Everyone wants to be driving EVs. I said, but let's be honest. It's going to be 2 to 3 decades at the earliest if everyone's going to drive EVs, and it may not happen. I said, so if we can have a device that can help the efficiency of an internal combustion engine to help move towards utopia, I said, I think the US government would be interested because everyone's trying to move that way, but EVs aren't going to do it. So that's how we got involved. And
I think that's a really important point. Sorry to interrupt, but I think, the electrification process of how society functions, the one thing that we forget is this reduce, reuse, recycle, which means a lot of the stuff that we've implemented as a society that we currently use, we need to use it as long as possible before we all drop our vehicles off and go and buy an EV car, right?
That's right.
And so I think that if we can find some efficiencies in how we utilize these things and use them as long as possible before we transition over, there's a really important element to sustainability right in that.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about not only does he use tellurium, not tellurium powder, but there's no moving parts in his thing. So it makes it as simple as possible. So when he said we can make the internal combustion engines much superior. I said, okay, let's have a look at it. And then since then, there's been a number of opportunities that have come up, like people that have greenhouses. We calculate that we can save them 30% on their electricity costs, which I'm sure to the farmers is very big. And then there's drones, potential much support, because we're going to see more and more deliveries from drones, like companies like Amazon and so on. So if you can make a drone that lasts longer, flies farther, it goes from there. So there's lots of opportunities, and he's been getting contacted by companies in other industries, big companies, that we hadn't really thought, oh yeah, there's a good application here for the thermoelectric. So it's just a matter of educating people on this new foundation that we have. So as a result of that, I've been lucky enough. I went to a critical metals conference in Washington, D.C. at the end of April. It was April 30th and May 1st and 2nd. And I had 3 goals in mind. I wanted to go down and have a good presentation for the company because, we are unique, explain to people, because I'm sure they're confused saying, well, this doesn't make sense with what they have. And by the way, I was used to that with Quinto, my other company, until we proved it. But also I wanted to meet with someone from the Department of Energy, if I could, and someone from the Department of Defense. And the reason for those two is that the Department of Energy about 2 years ago put out a news release that they were going to set aside $3 billion for better lithium batteries. And then the Department of Defense put out a white paper with 4 issues they wanted to work on, and number 2 or number 3 was better lithium batteries. But I thought, okay, here's my chance. I hope I get to talk to one of them. So it just so happens at lunch on the Monday, he said, anywhere you want. There's a couple of ladies at the table and another gentleman to start talking questions. And I finally realized after 5 minutes, I'm not the brightest guy in the room, and it took me 5 minutes to realize, I think this lady's with the Department of Energy, but I'll wait for her to finish eating, So she finished eating. I said, excuse me. I said, I was late to the table. I said, are you with the Department of Energy? She goes, yes, I am. I said, oh, have you heard of the University of British Columbia's lithium-tellurium battery, which is far superior to lithium-ion? No, I haven't. I said, can I tell you about it? So she says, sure. So I sat there, talked with her, blah, blah, very good, and told her all the advantages. And then I said, oh, by the way, I'm in town to talk with an NGO here in Washington about maybe getting involved with our new thermoelectric device that we've just patented in the United States. And she said, who is it? So I said, oh, what's Resolving, who are our partners in Salmon Gold. And she goes, oh, Stephen Desposito, he's the CEO. Stephen Desposito, what a gem. Are you involved with him? Oh, yeah. I said, well, have you heard of Salmon Gold? She goes, yeah, that's, you get gold from Alaska and is it Yukon? And then sold to Apple and all these other companies. I said, yeah. I said, well, we're the Canadian partner. We're Salmon Gold. Oh, my goodness. So we exchanged cards, I should say. So I went up and I wasn't going to look at her card then. She was the chair of the Department of Energy's battery division. So I thought, can't get better than that. And then the next day, it was a panel discussion with someone from an ESG company, someone from the White House, and someone from the Department of Defense. So I managed to talk to someone from the White House. Are you familiar with this lithium-tellurium battery? No, we're not. I said, oh, tell him a little bit about it. He took my card. And I said, I'm also working with an NGO here to the thermoelectric. Oh, who is it? Same response, Resolve. Everyone knows who they are. But then the most important meeting, introduction, I got to meet someone from the Department of Defense, who other juniors that don't know this, they should know. It's going to be very beneficial. The Department of Defense, he said on the panel that they've sort of had a new procedure, how they do things. Before, they used to help companies that were more advanced with their preliminary economic assessment expenses or bankable feasibility studies and so on and so forth. But now they're taking the approach that, hey, we need to get these critical metals as soon as we can. So if we can help junior explorers so be it. We're willing to do it. But you have to meet a certain criteria. Anyway, so I used my usual pitch when he got off. Have you heard about this lithium-tellurium? No, I haven't. From UBC, sat down. So he was, I don't want to say he's blown away. You don't really attribute that, but he was very excited. And so we exchanged cards. And then when I got back to the hotel room, he emailed me to say, hey, let's follow LinkedIn. Here's my personal number. So since then, so that was early May, May 2nd, I guess it was. I've had 4 meetings, conversations with the Department of Defense, 3 of them specifically about First Tellurium, and the other one was a combination of the University of British Columbia and their partners and ourselves on the lithium-tellurium battery. Amazing. So yeah, so what's happened is they asked us to join their consortium, but then you can talk with financial assistance or whatever the case is, but you have to be a member of the consortium. We file for that. We're just waiting for our registration number so we can officially move things forward. But it's not going to happen for every junior company. You have to be critical and you have to be there. But with all the applications we have, it's very, very exciting.
Very, very exciting news. Well, listen, again, it's so wonderful to host you as our 3rd interview, and we will continue to watch what you're doing. Any advice that you would give as we close out on places that people can learn more about First Tellurium or tellurium itself and some of the innovations that are happening around it?
Yeah, I would say go to our website, firsttellurium.com, and I guess go to our YouTube channels, because we have a tendency to put out news too often, I think. It's probably about a news release a week or 2 a week. And
we like hearing from our issuers.
Yeah, but the one bad side of that, downside is that I haven't been able to buy any shares for the last 2 or 3 months. I'm the largest shareholder, and I don't sell. Between my wife and myself, I think we own 13 or 14%. But because there's so much news, I don't want to be in a position of having to buy shares today and we put out news tomorrow, the next day, the commission or CIRO will come back and say, hey, you knew what when. So it's kind of like, let it go and people can figure out what the share price does. But one of the other things I mentioned, but I forgot to mention about a thermoelectric, when I say, don't believe a word I say, but this is what, Apple says, and this is what NGO says, and so on and so forth, UBC, is that Michael, our inventor, was so sure about how this will be received that he, unbeknownst to me, I found out afterwards, he approached the National Science Foundation in the U.S. for a grant to move things forward. And he said to me, like, normally, because he's known these people before, they take 4 to 6 months to get back to you if they're interested in you pursuing what it is you're doing. And they got back to it within less than 2 weeks. And he started the process. So if they give it the thumbs up, and he's quite confident they will, but if they do, what that does is virtually every company in the U.S. is looking to find out, well, if the National Science Foundation gave it the 2 thumbs up, it's something special. And that's what he told me 2 months ago. It's irrelevant the size of the donation. Is if they've given it the okay, then that means that you've got something there and everyone will want to get hold of it. So it's very exciting. One thing I was remiss, if you don't mind, is that I forgot to mention about our MOU with Resolving, the people in Washington, D.C., and they sent their experts. They've been around for almost 50 years. They go around the world for various reasons, like they bring fresh drinking water to people that don't have it. They educate young ladies that are not allowed to be educated. They clean up mine sites. They're just a wonderful organization, and they have connections in Washington, in the States. So when I approached them and said, we've got this interesting situation, so they sent their top guys, scientists, to go through this device with Michael, just so they understood that, we actually knew what we're talking about with these patents. And I think they were duly impressed, so that we announced on May 30th, much to the surprise of people, is that we signed a memorandum of understanding that over a 3-year period, they're going to inject some money into the company to bring this to production with thermoelectric, regardless of what industry is it, automobile, drones, whatever the case is. And we mentioned, the first years, first 18 months is a little over $1 million, but the sum of it was 29 million US. So almost 40 million Canadian for a company with an $8 million market cap. So again, that confuses people. Oh, it doesn't make sense. So a couple of guys phone me up and say, well, they're valuing your company at $250 million or whatever it is, right? What do you think? I said, I'm not allowed to make that stuff, but my calculator, I'll just figure out what they think it is. So, it doesn't go from A to Z straight off the bat, but these are people who've done the research and they've got connections to big companies and so on and so forth. So, again, I may come across as arrogant, but I know we're sitting on, and I've been offered money over the last 9 months now from the Middle East, and I've turned them down every time because, they want discounts and this one and that. So, I'm not going to turn over 40% of my company to someone just for the sake of, 2-3 million US. Like, the governments have that available to us and so on and so forth. And now with the thermoelectric devices, these avenues are certainly opening up. So Who knows what's going to happen down the future, but I think it's going to be, my personal opinion, it's going to be something like a Quinto situation where people finally figure it out. Because I never told people when I sold Quinto for the 175 million, negotiations lasted 10 minutes.
Right.
That was it.
Well, listen, it's always a pleasure to catch up with you, and it sounds like there's some exciting things happening. What I love about what you've consistently done with First Tellurium is you build really strategic partnerships and relationships, and continue to build upon what you already have and kind of explore new opportunities, especially in the space of sustainability. I think that it's really amazing what you guys are working on. Tyrone, it's always a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great being here. Look forward to the next update.
Thank you.